some big news. I know, Brendan, you know, I even shot a couple of emails about this earlier this year, but Skydio receiving a waiver with the North Carolina Department of Transportation for BVLOS bridge inspections. So like the article says, this marks the first time a state transportation agency has been granted FAA approval for such a waiver. And I do think it was really impressive that the waiver was done in kind of in partnership with Skydio and the North Carolina Department of Transportation. As many of us know, North Carolina DOT was one of the sites for the IPP program. But it was great to see them, you know, taking the kind of the lead here. Brendan, what can you tell us about the waiver process, and maybe just talk to us why it is so unique and kind of innovative?
Right. Thanks, CJ. So let me step back. And the North Carolina waiver is part of a larger story. And that story is the way that we're approaching not only technology based around autonomy, but also the regulatory system. So we're not just a technology vendor. We don't just sit there and make autonomous drones. We're actually on the field with customers, ensuring that they're able to use them the way they're intended to be used with minimal friction. And that's exactly what we did here. And our overall regulatory approach is somewhat different than you've seen before, which I think is why we're having some success. You know, again, this is a great credit to the FAA too, but we are laser focused on unlocking the airspace from the ground up. And I mean that in the most literal sense imaginable. Imagine at every work site or every bridge along every highway and every electrical substation being able to fly beyond visual line of sight at low altitude first, masked or in the vicinity of both structures and terrain, where you present almost no risk to manned aircraft unless the manned pilot is drunk, and extraordinarily high levels of value to the operator who's conducting the mission and the asset owner. That's our approach. You know, traditionally the industry has spent a lot of money and a lot of years trying to fly as high and as far as they possibly can. That's great. We love that. It's important. But when you talk to a regulator, their heads explode. The higher you want to fly, the farther you want to go. When you talk to the regulator and say, I just need to fly below this 200-foot tall light pole in a rail yard to conduct real-time inspection of multi-billion-dollar assets that determine whether or not you get your next Amazon package, then you can have a conversation. And then the regulator is willing to step forward and maybe break some rules that have applied in the past. So that's the approach we've taken at Skydio. And when I joined the company in January, we settled on a two-pronged approach, and I'll make this quick. The first was we want to work with a public sector operator who has a little more latitude under Part 91 to accept ground risk to mission. No more latitude to accept risks to manned aircraft, but a little more latitude in ground risk. That's exactly what we did. So the Chula Vista Police Department, big partner of ours, we worked with them to secure the first ever tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver that allows public safety officers to fly within 1,500 feet beyond visual line of sight, within 50 feet of structures of the ground, with no visual observer at all, and no requirement to leverage radar or other extremely expensive and unnecessary means of detecting and avoiding manned aircraft, which you shouldn't encounter at that kind of low altitude. As you remember, a month after we got that waiver, the FAA did something they've never done before. They enabled every single public safety agency in the country to do the same thing without a waiver. It's almost regulation by rule rather than waiver. You send the FAA an email with a form CONOP, and you'll get the same authority that we spent 6 months working on the safety case for Chula Vista. So then we pivoted into part two of the strategy, which was let's use that victory to achieve a big breakthrough for our Part 107 partners and customers. That's what we do with North Carolina DOT. And the waiver quickly broke through a couple of barriers. And one, if you want to do these close-in inspection operations, you've had a technological barrier. All drones in the market have traditionally required GPS. All drones in the market have traditionally been subject to electromagnetic interference, and they have also required highly expert pilots, especially to fly really low. There's also a significant regulatory barrier. Good luck inspecting a bridge without needing to fly beyond visual line of sight. People do it, but it takes 2 to 5 times longer than it should because the operator has to reposition herself every 10 or 15 minutes to maintain visual line of sight. That doesn't make sense. We're living in the 21st century. The drone should do the hard work. That's what we believe at Skydio. And that's what we did with our partners and friends at North Carolina DOT, where we worked with them to get a breakthrough waiver that has 3 features that are totally new in the industry. One is the waiver allows beyond visual line of sight flights with no visual observers. You really haven't seen that before. Second, it doesn't require radar or other forms of expensive, and in this case, unnecessary, detect and avoid. And third, it's not site specific. So the North Carolina DOT pilot, when he or she shows up to a site, can run through a set of performance-based criteria. And if those criteria are met, that pilot can initiate beyond visual line of sight flights without phoning home to the FAA. The pilot can be a pilot and do what I do in a manned aircraft and decide what is appropriate in a given context. That is something that is breakthrough, right? These barriers have tied the hands of commercial operators and no longer. And I want to give a shout out, of course, to North Carolina, but also to the FAA. They knew that granting this waiver would open up a deluge of interest across the commercial space in doing the same thing in a variety of other sites. And it absolutely has. So again, I just want to give credit to the FAA for ultimately approving this waiver, knowing though that it would give folks the muscle memory and the power to try and apply it to other settings.